Romans chapter 11. This is great stuff right here. And Paul has been building to this since he started with chapter 9. Your Hebrew word for the morning. There's 3 Hebrew letters in it. This is, again, one of the most famous Hebrew words. And you actually know this Hebrew word too. This is the shin. That's the letter in the Hebrew alphabet. This is the beit. This is the tav. So, to show you that you even know a little Hebrew, this shin actually has a sh sound. The beit, guess what, has a B sound. The tav, guess what, has a T sound. Well, really in Hebrew, just T. I'll give you permission to add an H sound to it. But in the Hebrew, it's just a T. So again, Hebrew just as consonants, we have to add the vowels that we think. You want to take a shot at what that Hebrew word is? Shabbat. That's right. Shabbat. Yeah, Sabbath is Sabbath. So another Hebrew word that you know. It literally means, and this won't surprise you, it literally means to rest or to cease. The word is used, for instance, in Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Cease and know that I am God. Shabbat and know that I am God. So, the theology of Shabbat or Sabbath is important to Jews and Christians. We need to learn how to Shabbat better than we do. And part of let me tell you a little bit of theology of Shabbat. It's not just so because we need rest, we do. It's not just that we need 1/7 of our time devoted to God, because we do. But think about when the Israelites were given this. You know, Mount Sinai, Charlton Heston, 10 Commandments, all that stuff. They received this commandment as they're wandering into the wilderness, going into the land of Canaan, defeating the Girgashites and Hivites and Jebusites and Amorites. They're going in there to defeat the people and create a new world. Now, and you thought you had a task ahead of you this week. Think about the task ahead of the Hebrew people. And God says, by the way, Shabbat during that task. One of the theological reasons for Shabbat, and this is why we don't do it, because it offends us. Shabbat offends us. The theology behind Shabbat is if you stop, if you cease, if you quit, the world goes on jolly well without you. And that offends us. We think the whole world depends on our activity, what we do. We can't stop. You can't believe in Shabbat and be a workaholic. Now, if you believe that the whole world depends on you, yeah, you can be a workaholic. But that's why those of us that have a workaholic tendency find Shabbat very hard. But it's a spiritual thing. I can stop. I could even go to sleep tonight because God will stay up and handle what's going on. But that's why there's a theology behind Shabbat. There's a spirituality behind Shabbat. And you thought it was just you can't buy alcohol on Sunday. There's a theology behind Shabbat that is critical to both the Jewish and the Christian faith. It's about trust. It's about faith. It's about knowing who God is, knowing who we are, knowing our place in the grand scheme of things. So Shabbat is important. So if you don't know how to Shabbat, your next question should be asked, why? And by the way, give this no added charge. I was talking to somebody this past week that I greatly admire, who's filled with wisdom, and he says you should always ask why 5 times in order to get to the reason. Why can't I Shabbat? Because I'm busy. Why are you busy? Because I just need to be. Why do you need to be? Well, the world can't function without me. So ask why 5 times to get back to the real reason. There's some good wisdom in that. Why? Why can't we Shabbat? Anyways, there's your Hebrew for today. Now, and we've got several weeks. So what we're going to do is finish up chapter 11. I'm going to go to some other places in the Scriptures to talk about what we're introduced to today, the great end time revival or ingathering of the Jewish people. The great revival or the ingathering of the Jewish people to Christ that we have looked for centuries because of what we find in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So we'll have time to do some of that. Chapter 11, we'll start back at verse 11. I just briefly hit verses 11 through 12 last week. We're going to start back there because Paul's going to tell you why, back to why. Paul's going to tell you why God allowed the Jewish hearts to be hardened, their eyes to be blinded to Christ. Paul's going to tell you why God allowed that. And God's going to tell you that that's part of His plan, that's part of God's plan. And Paul's going to tell you why it's part of God's plan. What God is doing by allowing the Jewish people's hearts to be hardened and their eyes to be blinded. Because that's been true of the majority of Jews since Christ came. I remember John chapter 1. He came into His own, and His own received Him not. There were some that did. Paul's one of them. There were some that did receive Him, but the majority did not. Why did God allow that? What is God's grand purpose and plan? And what's going to come about as a result of that? That's what Paul's getting at here, and that's what he's been working toward. So, start with verse 11. So I ask, did they, and the they here is important. This is national or ethnic Israel. It's not the church. It's not the church as the new Israel. That's all in the New Testament to a certain extent. But Paul here, to be consistent, from chapter 9 through chapter 11, he's talking about ethnic Jews. He's talking about ethnic Israel, the state of Israel, the country of Israel. So I asked then, did they stumble in order that they might fall? And I hope you know the difference between stumbling and falling. Did they stumble in order they may fall? And there you see the meganoito. Paul likes doing that. He asks a rhetorical question, and he gives you a strong no, meganoito. No, they didn't stumble in order they may fall. Well, let me read on. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, that's us, so as to make Israel jealous or envious. Now, if their trespass, their hardened hearts, their blindness to Jesus, means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentile, how much more will my translation says full inclusion mean? The word's just fullness there. So, if we benefit like we have benefited from the Jews, and we're even benefiting from the hardening of their hearts and the blinding of their eyes, if we benefit from all that, how much more are we going to benefit at the full inclusion of the Jewish people? So, several things Paul's throwing out here these are going to discuss. They have stumbled. And here's where your English translation makes a big difference. They have stumbled so not to fall. They haven't been rejected. And some English translations, mine does it too. I prefer not the word because I think this is truer to the text. Instead of saying God rejected them, I think it's more biblical to say God allowed them to defect. So God hasn't rejected. God has allowed them to defect, has allowed them to choose to be blind, has allowed them to choose a hard heart in regards to the Mashiach. That's Hebrew for Messiah. So He's allowed that. But again, to stumble is not the same as fall. So I'm a little hesitant, we are a little hesitant to use the word fall there because a stumble doesn't guarantee the fall. But it certainly says you may be about to fall. My father, who was a great man in so many ways, but he had some weird notions. He's passed that on to his son, I guess, my wife tells me. My father in his latter years always told me, usually when I'd say use a cane, he would tell me he knew how to fall. Yeah, his neighbors who would call me and say, Jeff, your dad's laying in the front yard again. He knew how to, and what he meant by that, he knew how to kind of go down softly. I would disagree with him. I would tell him not to depend on that skill. Because sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes before you even realize you're stumbling, you fall. But there's a difference between stumbling and falling. You can stumble and not necessarily fall. So again, make sure you're hearing what Paul's saying here. But what's the reason? What is the reason that God has allowed the Jewish community to have a hardened heart or blinded eyes spiritually? What's the reason? So as to make Israel jealous, because as a result of that, what has happened? You bunch of Gentiles are sitting here in High Point today. You're seeking to worship and serve Jesus. You've accepted Jesus as the Mashiach. You've accepted that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah who came in fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures to the Jewish people to deliver the world. So what he's saying is, had the whole Jewish race, and by the way, don't feel too bad about the Jews because we Christians do this, had the whole Jewish race accepted Christ, they might have enjoyed Christ themselves and had their own little Jesus party and never shared him with the rest of the world. I see some Christians that aren't really concerned about sharing their faith with other people. They just want to keep Jesus as their own private possession so that they can have their own Jesus party and receive the benefits of Jesus. So don't feel too bad about the Jews not perhaps and God knew their nature. That's why throughout the book of Isaiah, they are told over and over and over and over again, you're to be a light to the Gentiles. Remember the Abrahamic covenant, which we've mentioned several times. God said, I'm choosing you. I'm going to make you a father of a great multitude so that you can bless the world. Well, some people don't even want to bless High Point, much less the world. So don't feel too hard about the Jews because it's still an issue among Christians. That's why Jesus attacks. This is your homework. I want you to go see how he does this. Jesus attacks in the latter part of Luke chapter 4, the saying. I'm giving you the modern American English version of the saying. Jesus uses an ancient Hebrew version of the saying, but they mean the same thing. What he attacks, to tell you what it is in English, charity begins at home. Yeah, he attacks that. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Go look it up. He uses another quotation from the Hebrew world. Not that charity begins in the home, but he has another way of saying it. But it's the same concept. Sometimes, and the issue is sometimes when charity begins at home, it ends there too. We dish our charity out in teaspoonfuls at home, so the people beyond our home barely get a teaspoonful of our charity. So don't feel too hard about the Jews here. They would, I don't know, if they had all accepted Jesus, you might know as much about Jesus right now as you know about the Talmud, or the Midrash, or the Mishnah, or the Gemara. It's a Jewish thing. That's why you don't know a lot about it. It's a Jewish thing. Well, God knows what God's doing. That shouldn't shock you. By the hardening of the Jewish heart, by the blindness that God allowed them to accept. That's why several times when Paul gets frustrated with the Jews in the book of Acts, because the synagogue in the city of Philippi won't listen to him, he says, I'm going to the Gentiles. They'll listen. Had they listened, he might not have made it on to the Gentiles, except he's getting ready to tell you that his calling in life is to be an apostle to the Gentiles. So that's why he's an apostle to the Gentiles. He's helping fulfill God's plan to make sure that this Jesus stuff goes to the whole world. So that's the point of why the Jews didn't get on board. You know, God was not sitting up in heaven saying, can you believe what those Jews are doing? No, it was part of the plan. It's part of the way of making sure that the Jews become a light to the Gentiles. The Jews become a light to the world. So we've already benefited by their rejecting Christ. So how much more are we going to benefit by their full inclusion? So this is where we began to look at what I want to really spend some time looking at in the next couple of weeks. The possibility, or I think assurance, of a great end-time revival, ingathering of Jewish people into the Christian faith, into the Christian community, into receiving Jesus. And that's why we're not going to get, well, I may read it to you. That's why in verse 26 of this chapter, he's going to work his way to verse 26 of this chapter. And he says, in this way, all the stuff that he's saying right now, in this way, what are the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words? Yeah. And you know what that means in Greek? All Israel will be saved. So that's where he's working toward here. But he's going, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. But anyway, that's the full inclusion. Something's going to happen to the Jewish people. Now look at verse 13. Now I am speaking to you Gentiles. Remember I told you way back when, he's writing to the Gentiles, people like you and me. They're in Rome because they are being arrogant toward their Jewish friends, their Jewish fellow believers even, but particularly toward the Jewish non-believers. They're being arrogant toward them. He's confronting their anti-Semitism. So he's writing to the Gentiles. He's speaking to the Gentiles. The church was mixed in Rome, like it was around the world for most of the first couple hundred years of the Christian tradition. It was a mixed Gentile-Jewish world. But he's just talking to the Gentiles now in Rome. He said, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, and my English translation says, I magnify my ministry. That doesn't mean he brags about his ministry. It's like what he's doing right here is he's putting his ministry under a magnifying glass. He's saying, my call is to the Gentiles. And isn't that convenient that God is doing all I'm talking about so that the Gentiles can come to know Christ? And that's why he's saying he's doing this. He's doing this. I think part of the reason that Paul always started off in synagogues when he went to a city. He actually just went to cities, the best we can tell in the book of Acts. He actually usually just went to a city that had a synagogue. He would start off in the synagogue. Paul, I think, lived with the conviction that when there would be a great ingathering of Jews to the Christian faith, Jesus would return. So to quote Peter, by doing what Paul's doing, he's sharing Christ with the world, including the Jews. By doing what he's doing, he is, to quote Peter, he may be hastening the return of the Lord. That's part of Paul's motivation here. He knows it's God's plan to take Jesus beyond the Jewish community to the world. It's God's plan to take this Jewish Messiah. Again, Christians being anti-Semitic just blows my mind. That's just that's ridiculous. But because Jesus is a Jewish Messiah who came in fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures to the Jewish people. But we get to benefit because he had to go beyond the Jewish people. Anyway, so Paul's saying, and I'm part of this, I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. Verse 14, he's going to tell you what he's doing, and he paid a price for doing this. He will list his suffering in 1 Corinthians. You can read about his suffering in the book of Acts. He paid a price for doing this. Verse 14, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous. Well, he did that on a regular basis. And again, he listed his suffering. When he talks about receiving the lashes so many times, the 39 lashes so many times, keep in mind, 39 lashes was a Jewish punishment meted out by synagogues. So yeah, he paid a price for irritating all his Jewish brothers and sisters. But notice he said, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous and thus save some of them. There's no salvation outside of Christ. Yeah, that's clear in the New Testament. You may not like that, but that's clear in the New Testament. Take that one up with God. Look at verse 15. For if their rejection, I don't like the word rejection. I'm curious, does anybody's English translation say something besides rejection? What? Casting. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like God doesn't send you to hell, but He'll let you choose that. So that's why I'm a little down on the word rejection here, because Paul's just saying, no, God hasn't rejected them. God has allowed them to defect, to walk away. God has allowed them. And if you read rejection, that's fine. Just know it's their rejection, not God's. The point here is Paul saying the promises of God are irrevocable or irrevocable. God's promises have no expiration date on them. So the rejection here, rejection is fine, just know it's their work, not God's work. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, they reject, so Jesus goes to the world, so the whole world gets to be reconciled to God through Jesus Christ. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, watch this, what in the world will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? So what will it look like when they accept? What kind of blessings will that mean? Remember, Jesus said to the Jews in Jerusalem, you will not see me again. And we'll look at this text later. You will not see me again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Sounds like a welcome to me. So what will their acceptance mean for us? But life from the dead. This may mean spiritual life. This may be pointing to the resurrection at the end of history. Now, Paul's going to give you examples. He's a good teacher. He's going to give you examples to explain this to you. And I've always been grateful that Paul here would not have made my high school English teacher happy, because Paul does not mind mixing metaphors. He's going to mix metaphors in one verse here. He's going to mix a metaphor that he assumes you know. If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the lump. We'll go back and talk about first fruits and dough. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. So he's mixing his metaphors here. He's talking about two things that he assumes you know about. One is the dough that's offered as first fruits. If you go back and read, I'm sure you have in your Bible, if you have cross-reference, or in your Bible, if you have study notes, you're probably told to go check out Numbers chapter 15. And you read about this offering that Paul's talking about. What he's talking about here, when we're talking about how the dough, that's the first fruits, makes the whole lump holy, he's talking about, what's explained in Numbers 15? The first fruits. And we talked about that yesterday in church, because what you promised to bring, your offering to God is the first fruit. Now, that means a couple things. And I noticed that Warren Lackey, when he was talking to our congregation yesterday about our generosity, he said, and this is one of the two things, first fruits means if you bring your first fruits to God, that definitely means you don't bring your leftover fruits to God. The first part of your harvest, the first part of your income, the first part of what you get goes to God. And that's true. First fruits, not leftovers. The second thing, though, almost more biblical, and this is what Paul says here, how the first fruits makes the whole lump holy. How does first fruits, how does a little bit of leaven, how does a little bit of leavened dough make the whole? Well, what he's saying about first fruits also is that, and this is a strong biblical sense, even into the New Testament. Well, first fruits means it's a guarantee there's more to come, which is why Paul talks about Jesus' resurrection as the first fruit. His resurrection guarantees what? Our resurrections. So the first fruit is not the leftovers. The first fruit guarantees there are more to come. And because the first fruit Guarantees there are more that come. The little bit of leaven that's offered in this offering, this reference in Numbers 25, a little bit of offering makes the whole lump holy, makes the whole lump usable for God, makes the whole lump something that's offered to God. So we've talked about remnant, the remnant of Jews, such as Paul himself, the remnant of Jews that are saved, just like there's a remnant of Gentiles that are saved, is a guarantee of a fuller harvest to come. You're not all there is. There's a guarantee of a fuller harvest to come. So that's the lump image. Now, the image I love even better is he goes to an image now, and this is what he's going to pick up on. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. Now he continues to talk. What kind of plant are we talking about? Olive tree. There is a reason that the hotel I use in Jerusalem is named the Olive Tree. There is a reason, and I didn't even do this. My wife did it. Made me so happy. There is a reason that in my sunroom, guess what's growing? An olive tree. Yeah, you may like your azaleas. I can't find azaleas in here at all. But an olive tree means something. In Hosea, in Jeremiah, olive tree symbolizes the people of Israel. So my olive tree, I don't know what your azalea does for you, my olive tree reminds me to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, reminds me to pray for the conversion of the Jews, reminds me to pray for my Jewish brothers and sisters. So literally, as I'm sitting at one of my reading chairs in my sunroom, watching the sun come up, to see the sun come up, I'm looking past the olive tree that's growing in my sunroom. Now, it's interesting, those things grow quick and fast. So I'm probably going to have to start, we almost now have to prune it for an olive tree. By the way, I don't think they'll grow in my backyard because of our weird season here. We're not warm enough to grow olive trees. But an olive tree is a beautiful, important symbol in the Bible. It is the symbol for Israel. It is a symbol for Israel. He's going to move into talking about the symbol of the olive tree for Israel. But notice, if the root is holy, the tree's holy. So most of us that live with this text say the root of the olive, you know this, the root of the olive tree is Israel. The root of the olive tree is Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the patriarchs. Again, back to the Abrahamic covenant. That's why the olive tree is holy, the root's holy that began it. So, Paul says that, and he thinks, well, I like this metaphor of an olive tree. Let me say more. Now, here's where English translation becomes really important. And I really am surprised. I'm really surprised more English translations don't get this right. Because I know we didn't start paying attention to this till World War II and the Holocaust, when you started saying, don't be anti-Semitic. This is a Jewish document, so read it like a Jew. Don't read it first like a Methodist or a Christian. Read it like a Jew first. But we went for hundreds of years not doing that, which was really kind of foolish and ridiculous. But anyway, right here is one place, because of how we've done our English for years, it begins a little bit problematic. Verse 17. He's going to talk about this olive tree. But if some of the branches were broken, I bet your English gives you another word right there. Broken. The word off is not in the Greek at all. Not a single time in this text. So I would prefer to just say, but if the branches were broken, maybe I think to get at what Paul's saying here, he would even say, but if the branches were bent. There's a difference between a branch being broken and a branch being bent and it being broken off. Again, Paul's sort of telling you it may be bruised, it may be battered, it may be bent, it might need the vine dresser, it might need a horticulturalist, but don't let broken off make you think that God has just washed his hands of the Jews. They're broken. For if some of the branches were broken, and you, now I love this, Gentiles, he's going to put you in your place, and you, although a wild olive shoot, you're a wild olive shoot. You're not part of You're not by nature part of the tree. You're a wild olive shoot. But guess what? You were grafted in among the others. And now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree. That's why we Christians, and we say it in the New Testament, Abraham is our father. Now, you're not the whole tree. You're not the roots. So don't be arrogant or boastful or puffed up or anti-Semitic. We owe a lot to the Jewish people. But it's only because of their rejection, which may not be a complete rejection of all Jews throughout history, because there's going to be a great end-time revival. But that's blessed us. We get to be grafted onto the vine. Now, I know some Christians, they think they're the whole plant. But we've been grafted. This is grace. We've been grafted onto the vine. Again, I like looking at my olive tree in the morning. We have been, by the grace of God, grafted onto this thing that's really a Jewish thing. We've been grafted onto the vine, grafted in among the others, and now sharing the nourishing root, and we've already talked about the root. The patriarchs are ours too, root of the olive tree. And now he says ways after here, verse 18, do not be arrogant toward the branches. They may be bent, they may be broken, they may not be where they need to be right now. But I don't know how in the world Christians can be anti-Semitic. We owe so much to the Jewish people. And please, 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 before you ever try to convert a Jew to Christ, tell them how grateful you are for the faith, and then apologize to them for all that Christians have done for 2,000 years, and then offer them Christ. If you want to have any success offering them Christ. But yeah, do not be arrogant toward the branches. I grew up in a world, and it still exists, where to call somebody a Jew was negative. I don't know how Christians do that. Anyway, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember it is not you who supports the root, but the root that supports you. That's why you have the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. It supports you. Please don't tell me you read the New Testament more than you read the Old Testament. In my tradition, the tradition I embrace, my daily lectionary that gives me 4 Bible readings, 2 are from the Old Testament, 2 are from the New Testament. And the great thing about that in my tradition is I get to read the New Testament twice a year. I get to read the Old Testament once a year. But yeah, don't be reading more of the Old Testament, more of the New Testament, ignore the Old Testament, because that's our root. That's our roots. But the root that supports you, verse 19. Trying to decide where I want to stop. Go ahead for verse 19. Then you will say, branches were broken so that I might be grafted in. Yeah, that's true. Some of the branches are dying or broken or whatever, but there's room for us to be grafted in. Verse 20, that is true. So this is probably a good place to stop, because he's going to start talking about their unbelief and severity of God, and he's going to start talking about them being grafted in again. And he's going to take you to verse 26, where he talks about all Israel being saved. So you have to stay tuned for some of that. But I'm just curious, reflections or comments or questions. I'm always fascinated. Like I said, when I take people to Israel, people just, their faith comes alive. Because up to that point, I'm around some Christians that don't realize how Jewish our faith is. Glenn.
Do you have any thoughts as to why Jesus did not have any Gentiles as disciples? They were all Jews.
Yes. There's probably some good reasons why Jesus had no Gentiles among his disciples. Same reason he didn't go to Tiberias or Sepphoris. Go with me to Israel. Tiberias is the biggest city up on the Sea of Galilee. I will take you back there at night, because it's a happening place at night. It's the big city up north. But when I take you back to Tiberias, named after Emperor Tiberius, the emperor that was emperor during the time of Jesus, or even before the time of Jesus, I will also tell you, but by the way, keep in mind, Jesus never came to Tiberias. It was a pagan city. It was unclean. Literally, and I'll show you this going into Tiberias. If you go into Tiberias from the south, because it was a pagan city built by the Romans to honor Tiberius, a big city. Sepphoris was the same thing. Sepphoris is near Bethlehem. When you come into Tiberias from the south, you literally have to drive through a cemetery. All of that made Tiberias unclean. You have no record. Those are two major cities in Jesus' day. You have no record of him going into those cities. Again, if he had Gentile followers, think about it. He goes to the Gentile side of the lake, right? That's where he finds the pigs. He goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He casts the swine. As a good Jew, he casts the swine into the Sea of Galilee, irritates the people over there. On that side of the Sea of Galilee is the Decapolis, the 10 cities, Decapolis. Those were Gentile places. So he ministers to them. But had he, well, and you see it there, the man who gets, Jesus heals him of the demoniacs. Did Jesus say to him, the man wanted to, remember? Did Jesus say, come get in my boat with me and let me take you to the other side, which is purely Jewish? No, what did he say to the demoniac? Go home. Go back to your people. It would have been highly problematic if he would not have been allowed to eat with Jews. Think of how many times you run across Jesus eating meals. He even eats with Pharisees and scribes. Not to mention the Last Supper. But he eats with Pharisees and scribes. All of those meals would have been off the table. Again, this confirms what Paul says. Go to the Jews first, then to the Gentiles. Yeah, it would have been highly problematic if he had had a Gentile. He knew them. He spent time with them on the other side. He spent time with them on his side. Remember, like the centurions, Roman soldiers. Yeah, but he didn't say, come have dinner with me. I'll go heal your child. But again, Jesus was a good, observant Jew. When the lady touched the hem of his garment, what did she touch? The tassels of his prayer shawl. We have so de-Judaized Jesus and the New Testament. That's why I like to say he came as a Jewish Messiah in fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures to the Jewish world. And I'm so glad that God saw fit to have a plan to get him to High Point, to let the Gentiles come in. Yeah, I think I've told you every time I take I say this so you won't be the one that does this. Every time I take somebody to Israel, usually within the first couple of days, they'll say to me, oh, Jesus was a Jew. I'm like, yeah, he was. That was a Seder meal in the upper room. He was celebrating Passover. His parents took him to the temple. Left him there one time, forgot him. But his parents took him, yeah. So that's the best historical guess why there's no Gentiles among the 12. Because he did have something to do with Gentiles. I'm glad he has more to do with Gentiles now. But it went first to the Jews. What else? Yeah.
In today's Jewish culture, with all that's gone on in Israel and Gaza lately, do they have any different attitude toward Gentiles?
Well, one of the another fascinating reason to go to Israel is there are so many different kinds of Jews.
Right.
And Israel was founded by secular Jews. It was actually founded by 1948. In the 1930s and 40s, it's the kibbutz movement, the kibbutzim movement. It was Jewish socialist communists who went and lived on communes. That's how they took the land back. That's why in the founding document of the State of Israel, there's no reference to God. That pains some of us, except there's a reference to the refuge. Now, Hatikva, their national anthem, was written became their national. It does refer to God. But all that simply is say, there's a lot of secular Jews. There's a lot of non-observant Jews. Because particularly in Israel, you can be a conservative Jew here, and you look really Jewish to us. Over there, they don't even count conservative Jews. Your wedding by your conservative rabbi doesn't even count as a wedding. So they kind of got themselves in a place there where it's very, very orthodox or not. Now over here, we kind of see all different types of Jews. They're pretty strict over there. Like my tour guides, I use Jewish tour guides. It's their choice. It's my choice, but they want to do it. It's their job. The Orthodox won't even consider them Jewish, really, because they take me places on Shabbat. None of my tour guides will eat pig with me, but they work on Shabbat. So that just, when you start distancing yourself from the very Orthodox or the Hasidim, the very Orthodox in Israel, you find a whole nother world of Jews. And so to answer your question, the non-observant Jew, and by the way, Christians do this. I've heard sermons where the preacher knew nothing about Judaism, except they knew that famous prayer that and it really came out of the season when the Jewish Christians and non-Jewish Christians were splitting. And you see some of that in the Gospel of John. It came out as the divorce started happening. Yeah, by the time the divorce started happening, you know how divorces occur. If you're divorcing somebody, they do nothing right. You do nothing wrong, they do nothing right. That's the way divorce is. So that's what started happening in the Jewish and the Christian world. So by the end of the first century, there were Jews praying a prayer of thanksgiving every day where those Jewish males would say, I thank God that I'm neither a Gentile nor a woman. Yes, they did call Gentiles dogs. By the time, again, that goes back to God's plan. The Jews didn't accept Jesus. Gentiles started accepting Jesus. They started, and you did too, they started seeing it as a Gentile thing, not a Jewish thing. So the more that happened, the more antagonism developed between them. That's post-New Testament. That's human sin nature coming into account. So there are a lot of secular Jews who would even not like the division between Gentiles and Jews. Because they're so secular, the Bible's not important to them. You may not, now I know in those of you that represent other churches, you don't have this in your church, but I got some here. I got some C&E Christians. They're Christian on Christmas and Easter. There are Jews around the world that go to Yom Kippur. They'll get their ticket so they can get their seat in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. Well, the Jews in Israel might have some question about whether or not you're Jewish. So that whole division, more liberal, open-minded, Reformed Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, they don't like categories. I don't know how you teach without categories. But anyway, that's a long answer to your simple question. The more prevalent question in the Middle East is how do Israelites feel about Palestinians? Now, Palestinians happen to be Gentile. Most of them, not most, a lot of them happen to be Christian. But the conflict between the Palestinian, Arab, Muslim world, and all those terms are connected, but they're not identical. Yeah, there's some hard feelings there. Well, you get another illustration. We know the hard feelings they have toward each other over there. And, hopefully you know the history about that. There was not hard feelings till all the Jews started returning to Israel. Do you know that it was Baron von Rothschild in the late 1800s and the early 1900s who bought up about an eighth of that region to give it to Jews? He was Jewish, to give it to Jews. There's a lot of history there. It's not as if just in 1948 the Jews showed up and said, y'all leave. It's a little more complicated than that. But yeah, for the 60 years before 1948, Jews were returning. But the more they returned to the Ottoman Empire, the more they returned to what was called Palestine, even though sometimes they bought the property, the more they started outnumbering the Arabs, the more tension developed. So the tension's there. I mean, I would even give you this example because human beings are funny. My tour guide that I use, because we've become close friends over the last 25 years, he's, by our standards, he's a good Jew. By their standards, he works on Shabbat and he hangs out with me. And one time I made the mistake, and he was so gracious, I may have told you this. You know, me and a person that was traveling with me, we wanted to talk politics. And he doesn't talk politics in front of my groups. So we took them, some of you know the American Colony Hotel, which came from the American colony that was founded by Horatio Spafford, who wrote It Is Well With My Soul, who's buried in Jerusalem. It was Christians who went there to help the Jewish community. Well, I just was trying to get out of my hotel with my people, went to the American colony. As soon as we sat down, before David even showed up, it hit me and my friends, this is not a kosher hotel. So as soon as David sat down, we said to David, we'll go somewhere else. He said, no, that's fine. I'll find something to eat. And we learned our lesson. He ordered a salad. And guess what was laying on top of the salad when it came? Dead pig all over the top of that salad. That was a line in the sand for him. So again, he looks pretty Jewish to me, but by orthodox standards, he has some wiggle room. Well, one time we were in the Holocaust Museum, which I hope you've been to the one in Washington, D.C. Give me a chance, I'll take you to the one in Jerusalem. We need to remember and learn those lessons. You know, they're very different museums. We should go to. I was in the Holocaust Museum, and we were there right at the time at Holocaust Remembrance. And Angela Merkel, you know who she is or was? You know, German. She had appeared a bunch. They were Germans all over the place. They were there because they feel a little bad about that incident. Anyway, and I looked at David. We were walking. I was here more German than I was Hebrew or English. We were walking out of the Holocaust Museum. I said, David. And he moved there because he had family killed in the Holocaust. He had one aunt in the late 70s who survived the Holocaust and moved there, and he went there. I'm walking out, and I said to David, how do you feel about all these Germans surrounding you? He said, I love them. I have forgiven them. I will not turn my back on them. That's what he said to me. You know, these deep old animosities go, particularly we're kids over here in the United States. We're such a new nation. Some of these countries have animosity and wars, and that goes way, way back. If you want to know how the Orthodox Jew feels about a Gentile, they will love you. Now, when I take you through the old city of Jerusalem, I take you through the Jewish quarter, and if it is Shabbat, anytime, particularly on Shabbat, I will tell you before we go in there, don't take photographs of the cute little Jewish kids with the curls. Mom and Dad may get a little upset with you, particularly if you're violating the Sabbath by using that camera. When I travel in Europe, we just need to know how to be respectful of each other. We can't erase the differences, but we need to know how to be respectful of each other. When I go, everywhere else I travel, I'm in shorts. I don't wear shorts in Israel. Because again, I want to be sensitive to the Orthodox Jews. They don't want to see my knees. And I might not, but I'm going to be sensitive to them. You know, that's why what we're after is not everybody acting the same, being the same, looking the same, speaking the same. What we're after is mutual respect for each other. So, yeah, I'll stop you from taking photographs of the cute little Jewish kids, because you might get a not cute Jewish father or mother who will come after you if you're violating the Sabbath and using their cute little Jewish kids to do it. But again, just be respectful. And that's what we're after, I think, in life. That was a good question. You'd have to go to Jew by Jew to ask them how they feel about us now. My Jewish God loves me. He's still Jewish. One of the reasons I make sure he loves me and we have a long relationship is he probably knows that part of my relationship to him is my way of offering him Christ. That's why I offered to leave the American Colony Hotel. I'm going to continue to build the bridge to him. because I do want them to come to Christ. He may be part of the end time revival. I don't know, that we'll talk about. But I want you to come to Christ too, by the way. So I'm not saying anything anti-Jewish when I say I want them to come to Christ. I want you to come to Christ. That's the gift of God to us. Make you some Jewish friends, but start off by thanking them for all they've given you, apologize to them how we treat them for 2,000 years, and then live in their presence in such a way that they'll realize not all Christians want to create the Holocaust. Because that's what that's in front of them. When they see a crucifix, it's just hard to erase that history. It's really hard to erase that history. So evangelism to the Jews, which I believe in, is an art. Evangelism in general is an art form. You got to know how to do it. I know some Christians who think they're doing evangelism, and they're running more people away from Christ than they're bringing to Christ. I wish they weren't on our team. But particularly in regards to the Jews, you've got to know how to offer Christ to them. 11:35. Let's pray and get out of here. Next week we get into and all Israel will be saved. And we'll talk about that, what that means or doesn't mean or whatever. Let's pray together. God, I'm so grateful for this group of Christ followers that want to know you and know your way and know your will more perfectly. And God, we thank you for the root of the olive tree. We thank you for the olive tree. And we pray that we will allow you by grace, through our faith, to graft us onto that tree. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. See you later.